Classic advice states that if you want to live a happy life as a man, you want to reach all the classic milestones a man is expected to reach: getting married, buying a house, having kids, all the things your father achieved, like his father before him and his father before him. If you want all that and more, all you got to do is take care of yourself, work hard, take care of your basic grooming, shave and get a haircut regularly, dress decently well. If a man does all these things, classic wisdom states that that man should be able to find love and he should be able to find success. That's the advice you always hear, and that advice does work for a lot of men. It works for fewer men these days than it did back in our father's day, but it still works, especially for men that manage to go above and beyond, men that are making multiple six figures, or even guys that are born with some advantage, such as being tall. These men do tend to have success if they follow the traditional advice. But there are some men that seem to never have any success, no matter what they do. No matter how much money they make, no matter how tall they are, and yes, even if they have a good haircut, there are some men that nothing seems to work for. For these men, there is a discrepancy between the effort they put in and the amount of success they experience. This is the sub-5 discrepancy. For men that are below 5 out of 10 on the look scale, achieving success is nearly impossible.
Wait, but loser maxing, that can't be true. I see ugly guys with hot chicks all the time. My cousin Steve looks like a gopher with fetal alcoholic syndrome, and his wife is a smoke show.
Okay, well, even if that is true about your cousin Steve, which I doubt, but even if that is true, okay, so what? Obviously, there are outliers. Whether it be due to luck or just some rare set of circumstances, there are some unattractive men that do succeed in dating and careers. But those are outliers, and it doesn't do us much good to focus on outliers. There's no useful information there. Your outlier cousin Steve got lucky. You could make all the same moves and do everything exactly the same as he did, but if you are sub-5, you will almost definitely never have that same success. That's the thing about outliers. Those results are not repeatable. But what is repeatable is this. Picture a scale rating people on how physically attractive they are from 0 to 10. Let's make this our x-axis. Then for the y-axis, let's just have a scale for life satisfaction from 0 to 10. Or you could call it success, whatever. All we're doing here is we're trying to visualize how a person's looks correlates to their overall life satisfaction. Well, I would posit that for men, the plot looks like this. All the way from 0 to 5 on the look scale, life satisfaction is very low, maybe like a 2. It's almost a straight line all the way from 0 to 5. There's just a slight upward slant. So being a 4.9 out of 10 is not significantly better than being a 1 out of 10. Don't worry, we'll come back to that later. Okay, then right at 5 out of 10 on the look scale, there's a big spike, straight up to somewhere around 5 out of 10 on the life satisfaction scale. Then it continues at a slightly upward trajectory until you get around 8 out of 10 on the look scale, and then there's another spike all the way up to, let's say, 9.5 out of 10 for life satisfaction. Okay, now pay attention because this is important. For an average-looking man, if we call 5 out of 10 average, which it actually isn't, women tend to rate average-looking men far lower than you might expect, but we'll get to that in a minute. But for a supposedly average-looking man, 5 out of 10, 6 out of 10, you can see that life satisfaction pretty much matches their looks, and that's fair. Obviously, these life satisfaction ratings are just arbitrarily decided by me, but the important thing to notice here is the trend. if you are average or slightly above average in looks as a man, then assuming you take care of your appearance and you work hard and everything, then you can probably expect a quality of life proportionate to your looks. But if you're really good looking, say 8 out of 10 or better, then your quality of life isn't just proportionate to your looks. At that point, you're so good looking, women are throwing themselves at you. Everyone's bending over backwards to please you. You're living life on easy mode. So that's why there's a little spike here. But now let's talk about the big spike back here. This huge, insurmountable sub-5 cliff. As you can see, for a man that is less than a 5 out of 10 in looks, your life satisfaction is pretty much rock bottom. This is what is known as the sub-5 discrepancy. You might expect that a man that is, say, a 4 out of 10 in looks would probably have better life satisfaction than a man that is 1 out of 10. After all, that is how it works for men that are above a 5 out of 10. A man that's 7 out of 10 will have a higher quality of life than a 6 out of 10, who will have a higher quality of life than a 5 out of 10, and so on. But this cliff right here is where that changes. If it helps, then you can think of the y-axis as romantic options instead of life satisfaction, because the trend line will be the same either way. So a 4.9 out of 10 man and a 1.2 out of 10 man will have just about the same options and just about the same quality of life. That is, very, very few options and a very low quality of life. Now, there's a few reasons for the sub-5 discrepancy, and at least one of those explanations is actually a discrepancy in itself. But first, just in case you're wondering, what would this same graph look like if instead of plotting the life satisfaction for men, we plotted it for women? Well, it would look like this. Notice that there's no drastic fall off like on the men's graph with the sub-5 cliff. There is a bit of a spike here, but overall, life satisfaction for women tends to follow along proportionally with their looks. And the floor for life satisfaction for women is also just higher than it is for men. So it really begs the question, what is going on here? Why is there a sub-5 cliff for men, but not for women? To answer that question, let's take another look at the 1 to 10 looks scale for men. But this time, for the y-axis, we're going to be counting the percent of men that women would rate as being at each looks rating. So if women thought that 10% of men were a 1 out of 10, 10% of men were a 2 out of 10, etc., it was just 10% across the board, then that would be one possible configuration. But all the percentages have to add up to 100. Okay, because this is the percentage of the total male population that falls into each looks rating category. So what would you expect? You'd probably expect something resembling a bell curve, right? So the largest percentage of men would probably be at 5 out of 10 or 6 out of 10, with 4 out of 10 and 7 out of 10 being the next largest categories, and every other category after that on either end would be containing less and less men. Or maybe you'd expect there to be relatively equal numbers of men at each look rating, which would look like the 10% all across the board that we looked at earlier. Well, what if I told you the actual distribution, as determined by women, actually looks like this? I'm not making this up, by the way. This comes from an old study using data from OkCupid, but this is the actual data from that. In their study, women were asked to rate men on a 1 to 7 scale, so it's a little bit different. I stretched their graph to fit the 1 to 10 scale, and that's how I got this estimation. But the key takeaway here is that women rated 81% of men as being below average in terms of looks. So using a 1 to 10 scale, that means upwards of 80% of men are actually sub-5 in the eyes of women. In case you're curious, when men were asked to rate women, the results actually did resemble a bell curve. But 80% of men are sub-5, according to women. Now, of course, what people say and what they truly believe deep down aren't necessarily the same. This study is not perfect, but I still think it's safe to say that the majority of men are sub 5 in the eyes of women. Whether it's 80% of men or maybe a bit less than that, it is most men that are sub 5. There was another study using data from Tinder that found that men hit the like button on 62% of women's profiles, while women only hit the like button on 5% of men's profiles. So that seems to back up the fact that very few men are actually seen as attractive by women. So going back to the life satisfaction graph, what are the implications of most men being in this sub 5 region? Well, because most men are sub 5, most women are not willing to settle for most men. But most women do want to be with a man, but they'll only consider men on this side of the graph, which might only be 20% of all men. So there's a huge scarcity of men that women are actually willing to date. So because of this scarcity, that's why highly attractive men have such a high life satisfaction. And that's why sub 5 men's life satisfaction is way down in the dumps because, well, there's a couple of things. They're mostly invisible to women. Women aren't just not attracted to them, they just don't care about them at all. Dating is nearly impossible for sub 5 men. Although, yes, of course, there are outliers, but generally speaking, dating is pretty much impossible for these sub 5 men. The other thing is that the scarcity of men that women perceive as attractive creates this fear of missing out that is rampant amongst females. They all really, really want to be with the hottest guy possible, and they know the men they actually want are rare, so they're extra reluctant to ever entertain a man that is below their standards because that would just be antithetical to what they actually want. And when we're talking about a man that is below women's standards, what we're talking about for most women, that is the point right here, okay, this sub 5 cliff. So you might be wondering, why do women not find most men attractive? How is that even possible? Has it always been like this? Well, I don't think it has. Maybe there's always been some degree of women only being attracted to the top few men, but I think this is a relatively recent phenomenon where it's literally like 80%, or let's say at least 60 to 70% of men, if we're being conservative, that women just don't find attractive and also are not willing to date. So a big part of what exacerbates the problem and makes sub 5 men's chances so abysmal is that women now out-earn men and outperform men in virtually every metric of success, which is a huge problem because most women would never consider dating a man that they deem to be less successful than they are. And by success, I'm talking about some combination of social success and financial success. On average, women these days are much, much more successful than men. You can thank the female supremacy movement for that. Some people use the word feminist, they call it the feminist movement. I prefer to call it what it actually is. It's a female supremacy movement. But a big part of why women are finding rapidly more success in careers while men are falling behind is just because of the abundance of affirmative action that women receive in the workplace, especially when it comes to hiring. I know this is a touchy point for a lot of folks, but women have a much, much, much easier time getting hired at pretty much any job compared to men. That's just how it is. There's not a lot of data to back that up since all the institutions like social studies departments and universities, all these institutions that would be doing the studies, they're also female dominated. They try not to do studies where the results would frame women as being treated favorably as compared to men. That goes against the approved narrative. But it is pretty obvious, especially if you've attended university in recent years, You probably noticed that pretty much every female you graduated with had a job lined up before graduating, while most of the guys were struggling to find employment. So that's one thing. Women just refuse to date down. Historically, a mediocre looking woman probably would be willing to settle for a sub-5 man because back then they would have to. Because they couldn't just get a decently paying job themselves all easy peasy like it is now. Women just didn't work in most high paying fields. It was kind of unheard of. That's just how our society was structured. Now, you can say that's for better or worse, but that was how society was structured back then. And it's a lot different now, okay? Nowadays, women can make their own living, and they can do so much more easily than a man can. And very few women are willing to settle for sub-5 men because of this discrepancy between the financial and social success of women compared to the financial and social failure of men. Although maybe it's not fair to call it failure since it's kind of a rigged game we're playing at, but you get the point. Another big factor at play here is social media and how it distorts people's perceptions of reality. Social media has had negative impacts on men and women, but for women, what it does is it expands their access to attractive men. So without the internet and social media, a woman would only know about however many men physically lived in her local area. But now, a woman can get on Instagram or Tinder or whatever, and she can see attractive men from all around the globe. And some of these men will even give her attention. They will like her pictures, they'll leave comments, and even just the number of men that are physically close enough to actually date a woman, that number has increased massively with social media as well, because men always would have been willing to travel 2 or 3 hours to meet up with a woman. They just didn't have a way of actually meeting women that far away. But now they do. Plus, there's better infrastructure and more reliable vehicles being more commonplace. This isn't your grandma's society anymore. Okay, we're past the days of horse and buggy and dirt roads. If a woman wants to meet up with a man 100 miles away from the internet, that can be done. And usually the man will drive the entire way to do it. So even though proportionally the amount of attractive men is few in terms of raw numbers, the number of attractive men that the average woman actually has access to these days is actually larger than ever before. So it's a weird situation where women feel like there's a scarcity of attractive men due to the proportions of unattractive to attractive men in the general population. So they notice that when they go out running errands or whatever. But in reality, the level of access women have to attractive men is actually not scarce. There's actually an abundance. So that's part of why women absolutely just throw themselves at attractive men. They always have this fear of missing out that comes from a scarcity mindset, even though truly they have an abundance of options. No matter which way you slice it, shit's bad out here for most men. Most of us are viewed as sub-5, meaning women don't even consider us at all as a romantic option. Most sub-5 men experience years of rejection even after following all of the classic advice. Working hard, taking care of their looks, etc. Sub-5 men follow all the same advice that worked for their fathers and their grandfathers, but it just doesn't work anymore. It might work for slightly better looking men, but not for sub-5s. If you're at the bottom of the sub-5 cliff, this stuff just doesn't work anymore. Especially when it comes to working hard and grinding, just staying on your grind, trying to be as successful as possible in your career. That's not going to help at all these days. It's still good to earn more money, obviously, all things considered. Even if you have to live out the rest of your days chronically dry and alone, it's still better to have more success in your career as opposed to being a complete failure. But as far as getting with women goes, you're better off just doing whatever you can to improve your looks to a super 5 level. Okay, to a level above a 5 out of 10. If you are currently a 2 out of 10, I think it's very unlikely for you to improve your looks enough to be above a 5 out of 10. So that's not really going to do much for you. You're still going to be at the bottom of the cliff. But for most men, you probably should try looks maxing at some point, especially if you're overweight. Losing weight is probably the easiest and most effective form of looks maxing. I'm hesitant to ever recommend any kind of hard maxing, like cosmetic surgeries or anything like that, because those things could have significant risks. But maybe that is worth it for some guys. Either way, all I know is this society we're living in is absolutely fucked. Good luck out there, fellas. If you enjoyed the video or you found anything I said interesting, please check out some of my other videos. There's also some secret videos you can watch for free on my Patreon, so check that out. And as always, thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.